2. All right. Marco, good to see you, buddy. All right, I'm just going to be kind of going over, it's sort of like, it's a topic map for the story of the chrysalis, which I'm going to break down, or we're going to break down over the course of tomorrow's meeting on the press conference into the different chunks on the calendar. So we're going to break up the weekly calendar into these specific chunks. And so this is sort of a taxonomy of those chunks. I'll show it visually in a moment, just kind of some notes I have on it, but really I want to talk through it. And there's really, so I'm just going to frame it in the following way: the story of the chrysalis. And I'm going to break down the story of the chrysalis into 3 books. Book 1, Book 2, Book 3. Book 1 is the book of the caterpillar. And that's really the story of the last, 12,000 years of human existence, ever since the agricultural revolution, just speaking in broad brushstrokes, when we essentially became this caterpillar, just consuming and destroying everything for the satisfaction of these essentially artificial desires for accumulation, hoarding, basically when we just totally went off the rails and became the caterpillar. Book 2 is the book of the chrysalis, and that's the phase that we're entering now, or we're in it, depending on how you look at it. And then book 3 is the book of the butterfly, and that's where we want to get to after we pass through this phase of the chrysalis. And so let me just screen share really quickly. Just focus on the left side of the screen. There's nothing to see on the right side. And I wish I could just show the left side. But anyway, here's the big picture. So we have the story of the chrysalis, book 1, book 2, book 3. Book 1 chunks out into these 4 bullets. The game we've gotten ourselves into, and now we find ourselves trapped in, the all-day Monopoly game, as I like to call it. And then the roots. What are the roots of the game, right? And so we can address the game at its roots. The destruction of the biosphere, that's the result of the game, and planetary overheating, right? Anyway, and I'm sure there's other topics in that. Book 2, and here's where we are now, and where it's really interesting, is the chrysalis. I'll talk about Apollo 13 metaphor, Klingons, imaginal cells, survival of the imaginals in the face of the Klingons' attack, uniting the imaginals, the unification of the imaginals into a collective superintelligence, right? And then I'll talk about 3 phases of that. And then what do we do with this collective superintelligence? We're going to ultimately design the butterfly. And that really has 2 phases. One is what I call the dark side of the moon, phase 1, and phase 2, emergence from darkness. And I'll get more into details on this, which is kind of the heart of it, which is collective superintelligence, in a moment. But first, let me just kind of talk through what I've just shown on the screen. So book 1, the caterpillar, pretty self-explanatory, right? The agricultural revolution happened. We got into this monopoly game, and we've just gone with that for like the last 12,000 years. And it's been absolutely horrific in terms of its effect on our psyche, individually, collectively. And we're just trapped in the wrong game. We need to break out of it. Well, fortunately, the caterpillar is breaking down, which brings us to Apollo 13. And by the way, we're going to have to take maybe Friday night and actually screen share and watch the movie at the block party, because I think it's a really great metaphor for where we are now. So did you see the movie or the documentary about Apollo 13, Marco?
Not recently enough that I could talk about it intelligently.
Okay, well, I'll just recap for you the basic idea. So it's the 13th Apollo mission. In the movie, it stars Tom Hanks as like the captain of Apollo 13. Anyway, so they're out there in space about to orbit the moon, and some major malfunctions happen. And it's like, oh my God, are we going to lose Apollo 13 and its crew? Is everyone going to die? What's going to happen? And meanwhile, back on Earth at NASA headquarters in Houston, mission control on Earth, they're just, working frantically to find solutions and get, I'm just going to turn Apollo 13 from a train wreck in space into a butterfly that can safely fly back home. Okay. And I really like the metaphor of Apollo 13, as we'll get more into over the next couple of days, the Thursday press conference and the Friday block party. But now I'm going to embellish upon that story because you see, it took the collective intelligence of both the ground crew, right, at Mission Control on Earth, figuring out the solutions and then communicating those to the folks in Apollo 13 so they could implement them, save the ship, turn it into a butterfly that could safely return home. In our case, it's like that, but there's a whole bunch of Klingons on board. And the Klingons are the ones who are clinging on to the old model, right? And some of them are just overtly evil, like the criminal drug cartels who've attacked me and my family and businesses, as I've talked about before. And others who masquerade as imaginal cells, but they're really Klingons, like this network that I've made reference to, not by name, but this network that appears to be benevolent and compassionate and all these cool things, transformational, but really they've launched 2 serious character assassination attempts against me. But anyway, so there's Klingons of different stripes, but regardless, the ship is overrun with Klingons clinging on to the caterpillar story and clinging on to the old all-day Monopoly game of endless hoarding, destructively attacking the imaginals, right? So the story is a very dramatic one, and it's one that's our reality right now, which is that the ship is under attack by Klingons. The ship is Mother Earth, and there's these clusters of imaginal cells throughout the ship, and we need to find each other and we need to get together, right, and form a collective superintelligence so that we can come up with all the solutions that we need. Now, back to the real life Apollo 13 from the early 70s. So Apollo 13, when it first started to malfunction, the mission control NASA in Houston, and famously the commander of Apollo 13 radioed to Houston, "Houston, we have a problem." And you probably heard that expression over and over again. Okay, that's where that came from Apollo 13. "Houston, we have a problem." And and this gets to the butterfly. Here, let me screen share again, just so I can share that. See what the collective superintelligence, what the Chrysalis ultimately needs to come up with is the designer, in this case, redesign of the butterfly. And there's 2 phases, the dark side of the moon and emergence from darkness. So the dark side of the moon part is Apollo 13. They've got radio contact for a limited period of time, and then they're about to go behind the moon to the dark side of the moon, right? And of course, when they're on the dark side of the moon and Houston is out of radio contact, they're out of radio contact. So the phase 1 is they had to implement some stuff really quickly to conserve power, to conserve water, to conserve energy, to conserve whatever, and basically, shore up the ship for the journey around the dark side of the moon, so that when they emerged on the other side, however many hours later, and had radio contact again, they would have solutions for them, right? So in a way, it was a really interesting kind of division of dark side of the moon and then emergence. Now, prior to them going to the dark side of the moon, while they still had early radio contact, they had to design and implement phase one solutions of what to do right now, immediately, and while you're on the dark side of the moon, out of contact. And then that multi-hour period was when they had time at Houston to design the ultimate solutions to go full butterfly and bring them back home safely. So phase one of the dark side of the moon is just that initial set of solutions, quickly do this, do this, do this. And they had a limited time to figure that out. We have a similar situation here where we need to come up with phase one solutions to basically survive this period of darkness while the caterpillar is still doing its thing. There's Klingons all over the place, and we haven't really figured out the holistic set of solutions yet, right? And then emergence from darkness, phase two, is after we emerge from this period of the imaginal cells finding each other, going inward, and forming a collective superintelligence. That collective superintelligence will then be able to emerge from relative darkness and say, hello world, now we've got a holistic plan and we have to implement it, right? That's phase two. So is that clear? Any questions before I proceed?
No, the only question will be, how fast can we get a phase one work?
Yeah. Okay, well, let's get to that. So I'm going to screen share again. Now, so our work as, let's see, and our work is now completely within the chrysalis. We have unification of the imaginals to form collective superintelligence. That's where we're at right now. And I'm going to call these A, B, and C, not 1, 2, and 3, because that way we avoid confusion with phase one, etc. Whoops. Okay. All right. Something's not working here. But anyway, just think of it as ABC. Phase A, we have Chrysalis calendars, plural. Phase B, universal calendar, universal taxonomy, and planetary governance. And then phase 3, phase C, full-blown collective superintelligence. See, right now, we're in phase 1, chrysalis calendars, multiple chrysalis calendars. We are here. So this is the chrysalis as a whole. We're a tiny little sector within it. And we're coming up with our own chrysalis calendar, chrysaliscalendar.org, within which we're organizing all these conversations, talking about all the above, right? Which is, our domain that we're taking on, but organized into all these different conversations. Each of these circles represents a conversation. Each of the dots within it represents a person. And so here we are in a Zoom meeting talking about all these things. And, but we're still just in one corner of the chrysalis. Now imagine that throughout the chrysalis, there's multiple of these sectors, probably thousands, tens of thousands, each with their own chrysalis calendar, mapping out and organizing their own respective conversations. The big idea is that we go from all these separate chrysalis calendars to one universal calendar with a universal taxonomy of topics, that we come together and form essentially an emergent form of planetary governance. And that as we come together, and this goes from being a kind of a tiny network of conversations to a vast network spanning the entire chrysalis, the entire planet, that's when we'll be able to come up with better and better solutions, both phase 1, dark side of the moon, and phase 2, emergence from darkness, all the solutions that we need to cool the planet, stop and reverse destruction of the biosphere, heal humanity, spiritual transformation, all the above, right? So anyway, I'm just giving kind of a broad overview because we have limited time right now within which to work. But that's kind of the big idea. But we're starting with our own little sector of the chrysalis. You, me, all the folks who are in our network, and everyone's invited, but not everyone's going to hear the invitation, right? Because it's a pretty chaotic chrysalis so far, with all the Klingons running around, attacking, dividing, clinging on to the old games, right? Of hoarding, of money, of ego, of separation. So that's why I say phase A within the chrysalis is multiple different calendars. Each sector will come up with its own calendar, right? We're modeling what we're doing in our sector and broadcasting that as far and wide as we can throughout the chrysalis, and encouraging and listening for other sectors of the chrysalis doing similar things, creating their own calendar, creating their own networks of conversations. But as the different sectors organize themselves by their own respective calendars, we'll be able to connect the calendars and form a universal calendar, and ultimately a united chrysalis, a united imaginal cells, which can defend ourselves against the Klingons, because they're going to be attacking. They're not going to be too excited about a new form of planetary governance organized by the imaginals, right? Much less phase one solution, dark side of the moon, because they want to keep us in darkness, or much less phase two, emergence from darkness, right? And so, we need to both protect ourselves, protect all the imaginal cells, and create a context for a new form of planetary governance where everyone is fed plant-based foods. We stop the destruction of the biosphere. See, all that requires governance, right? It requires humanity coming together and defining and enforcing constraints. Nobody goes hungry, no more decimation of the Amazon or its indigenous tribes or its ecosystems, its forests, its waters, etc. Right? But to accomplish all of this, which is a seemingly gargantuan task, like the Chinese saying goes, many hands make heavy work light. As we connect all the imaginal cells sector by sector and bring the different chrysalis calendars, plural, in connection with each other to form a universal calendar, that's when we really become many hands working together to co-create all these solutions, to design the solutions, right? Ultimately to design, or in this case, redesign the butterfly to bring us home to safety, right? And of course, once Apollo 13 comes home to safety, then it's a whole new chapter. What do we do now that we're safely home? What do we do once we've stopped the exponential planetary overheating, even reversed it, stopped the destruction of the biosphere, even reversed it? Then what do? We're at that point, we'll be like the dog who caught the bus. Now that we caught the bus, what do we do with it? Right? And here, let me just pause recording for a second. I'll be right back. So, so one way to look at this, Marco, is it's very much like a fractal, right? As we zoom in to the chrysalis and the collective intelligence that's emerging. Here, I'll screen share real quick. As we zoom in here, see, first we're just zooming into where it says we are here, this one part of the chrysalis. And we see the calendar and we see all these conversations that are happening just in this one part. And now zoom into any one of these conversations, you've got all these people, all these dots represent people, and they're all talking with each other. Each person has their own neural network, right? But what happens when we connect these different neural networks to each other, right? That's where it really gets interesting, right? And that's what a conversation is connecting these different neural networks of its constituent individuals together to form this collective intelligence. But that's just one of these circles, one of these conversations. Now, if we connect all these conversations together, then we form a bigger collective intelligence. And that's what's represented by the Chrysalis Calendar. But then if we do that across all the different sectors, then it's whole calendars connecting, whole networks. It becomes a network of networks. And so it becomes, if a single brain is a neural network, a conversation is a network of networks. This cluster of conversations is a network of networks of networks. And the whole chrysalis, once those are all connected together, becomes a network of networks of networks of networks, right? And that's the very definition of a collective superintelligence, which is what we're going to need to co-create all the solutions that we need for phase 1 and phase 2 and beyond, right? We need solutions to destruction of the biosphere. We need solutions to the game. We need to deconstruct the game that we're trapped in, the all-day monopoly game, which is driving the destruction of the biosphere and exponential planetary overheating, which, per Guy McPherson, will cook us all to death, right? If we don't get it under control. We urgently need to get it under control. So that's just the big picture. So to do all this, how do we start? Well, we start in our part of the world with our sector, our Chrysalis calendar. And we find ways to connect with the other Chrysalis calendars that are emergent. And we find ways to support yet other sectors that don't even have Chrysalis calendars and don't even see themselves as part of the chrysalis yet. We find ways to help these other sectors wake up and connect with the imaginal cells therein. See, there are those who don't want to wake up. There are those who want to stay in the current game because that's all they know. And they're just focused on winning the game, the all-day monopoly game of infinite hoarding on a finite planet, right? So I think our primary objective in phase 2, which is the chrysalis, before we even get to the butterfly phase, before we really even get to be able to implement these mega solutions that we urgently need, like cooling the planet through SRM, feeding everyone, etc. Book 2 of the chrysalis is all about the imaginal cells coming together and forming a collective superintelligence with which we can finally orchestrate the Klingons to become imaginal cells as well. See, ultimately, everyone needs to be an imaginal cell. Everyone needs to participate in the solutions. We cannot afford endless war, like what's happening over in the West Bank and Israel right now. I mean, we just enough, right? So to do that, only the imaginal cells can do this. Only those who really get what's going on, who see that it's the end of the road for the caterpillar. And the chrysalis phase is all about the imaginal cells coming together. So we've got to do this sector by sector. We've got to find ways to reach out to and connect with the other sectors. Part of our work is just setting the best example that we can with the chrysalis calendar for our sector of the chrysalis, but also connecting with all the other sectors to see what they're doing. Learn from them, they can learn from us. But ultimately, we all need to connect into one universal calendar with a universal taxonomy of topics, more like a Wixonomy, because it'll be totally flexible because different sectors will have their own taxonomies, and that's all fine to a point. but ultimately we need a single model for the world, right? Apollo 13, it wasn't like, they just let capitalism run amok and say, okay, let's see which solution gets the best funding or the most funding. No, 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 no. They all worked together because it was one Apollo 13 that they had to turn into one butterfly. So ultimately, we all need to unite around a universal taxonomy and a universal solution set and a universal planetary governance to get it all implemented. So it's a very tall order. But what else are we going to do? Right? There's nothing else to do right now but save our ship. And the first, and the next steps are bring the imaginal cells together, unite the imaginal cells, and protect ourselves against the Klingons as we form a planetary collective superintelligence. And that's what we're going to be exploring at the press conference on Thursdays, the block party on Fridays, our Monday meetings, and all this we're going to map out into a very specific schedule for the Chrysalis calendar. So that's what there is to do. That's how I see it. What do you think, Marco?
Well, I think we're living in interesting times. And I think that's, I can honestly say I don't know of a better plan. I don't really know too many people that I could say are even working on the plan at this level. Everybody's kind of got their little individual things that are, nobody's looking at at planetary scale change in a, at least not in a good way. I think there's a couple people out there, which, kind of the Bill Gates comes to mind, uh, you know, Bolsonaro and people like that are for big scale change, but they want to do it by eliminating people. That's not a way to go.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why, those are amongst the Klingons. And some of them present themselves as benevolent. Most of them present themselves as benevolent, and they think that they're playing the right game. They think that they're playing the only game. And we're co-creating a whole new game, a game called Saving, Healing, and Transforming Life on Earth, that has nothing to do with hoarding, nothing to do with separation, nothing to do with eliminating anyone. But yeah, it's some scary stuff, right? Because a lot of these Klingons are very powerful, and some of them do a very good job of presenting themselves as benevolent. I think what's going to really be clear is as we create these Chrysalis calendars and work towards unifying them into a universal calendar for the entire chrysalis, and a universal taxonomy and universal planetary governance, it'll just become very clear who's in and who's out, who wants to participate in this whole chrysalis phase so that we can design and implement all the solutions that we need, and who doesn't, right? And wherever there's disagreements, those can all be worked out in conversation. That's why the Chrysalis calendar of conversations is so crucial. That's how we do the sense making to then design the solutions based on what makes sense, to then implement those solutions, right? And it's an iterative kind of fractal framework that we're envisioning here for that. But ultimately it's one world and one holistic set of solutions for the whole world.
Yeah, that's really the only way to go forward. All the borders and hoarding just have to stop. I often make the comparison for people that still watch TV, you know, or may have in the past of the TV show Hoarders. And they say, you know, if somebody has a house full of Beanie Babies that they're in boxes and they're stacked up, or salt and pepper shakers that they don't have room to, you know, whatever they collect, that these people have done their collecting to a level where it's an illness and they need to be helped. And so the idea of the show is we come in and we teach these people how they can live without the hoarding, without accumulating all these, you know, in these cases,
Yeah, no, really good points, Mark. If you could wrap that up in 10, 15 seconds, and then we can go ahead.
easily. So tell me what the difference is between a billionaire that hoards so much wealth that he's got it stacked up and you could never use it. You know, what is the difference? These are sick people that need help.
Absolutely, and they become sociopaths because taken to an extreme, it's what's called hoarders without borders, and that's what we have right now. The global economy is hoarders without borders. That's exactly where we're at, and those are the Klingons, and it's Lord of the Flies Klingon style with infinite hoarding on a finite planet, causing infinite destruction, which they can't even see because they've become sociopaths, because and that's the definition of a sociopath in this case, is they're blind to the impacts they're having on the rest of folks. Anyway, with that, let's wrap it up. Really great seeing you, Marco, and that's what we'll check out tomorrow and delve into on the press conference.
Look forward to it. Thank you, Jamie.
Thanks so much, Marco. We'll see you tomorrow. Have a good night. Thanks.